Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Hi, Martin.
Yeah. Hi, Keith. Good afternoon to you.
I gather it's very hot where you are in Sofia.
Extremely. Today is far better than yesterday, but yesterday, just as I told you before we hit recording, it reached almost 31 degrees Celsius. Immediately after that, there was a huge cyclone-like wind, just bending trees almost to the ground. And both of those instances are not normal for this geographical region and time of the year. So
Yes. Let's not read too much into the omens of that, but that is pretty intense.
yeah.
Wow.
You can see people, because of our title is Lockdown Conversations anyways, so connecting to that, you can hear and you can sense the mood of many people connecting the catastrophic events of the virus to the weather.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't have the lockdown situation, such a weather will be just very strong wind that's not normal, but we'll probably just bear with it, and that's fine. And
Yeah.
right now, look at the virus, look at the world. We're all devastated, and right now, probably the weather is connected to the virus.
Yes.
In some way. There's someone up there hating us, being very out there with deities and just prescribing actions to them, willing actions to make your life worse.
Yes. What can come next? With that, well, it's a very old archetypal image, isn't it, of the human waving their fist at the sky, going, "Come on, what next? Is that all you've got?"
Yeah.
There's a kind of Shakespearean version of it. King Lear does a bit of that in a storm in the wild on the heath, but yeah, there's lots of other examples of that. I guess there's almost an Old Testament, shouting at the sky being as well.
This is what I'm having in mind right now.
And the Sumerians, but I don't know why suddenly ancient Sumer comes into my mind. That's just the kind of day it is. But the Sumerians had, I believe anyway, my ropey understanding of it, that the prevailing kind of dynastic king was an emanation of the storm god. So the connection of the sky to the ruler, whose queen was the priestess of the cult, as it were, is really interesting, and weirdly ties back into plague, pestilence. As there's a kind of the collapsing of the Sumerian Empire and the time where they fight the Egyptians with the big battle at Kadesh and all of that. That's plague affected in its own way. Everything loops back around.
Throughout history, this is at least in my remembrance of it, and what I'm recalling right now, plague and pestilence go hand in hand. They're like brother and sister, and even linguistically, and people speaking that out loud, they go together. And right now we have plague, of course.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if pestilence is there, but it's probably hidden or in disguise or something like that going on.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
Just not to jump straight into the subject, this is on my end with the weird weather and then people prescribing, hostility to gods. But
yes.
How is it on your end?
How is it this end? It's strange here. One of the things that seems to be arising here in the UK is, it's too early to say anything with any definitive aspect, of course, but there's the thing that's been getting my attention anyway, apart from the ongoing kind of lockdown and the way that frays a little bit around the edges. There's the unintended consequences of government decision making, which is that basically you're having the four nations, as it's often referred to in the UK, so Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and then England, and three going one way and one going the other. So what would be spoken of as Britain is basically just code for England at this point. And here in Wales, as indeed in Scotland and Northern Ireland, the rules are different, and the pace of change of lockdown is slower, and the message becomes things like keep the English people out because they're all going to spill over madly in their frenzy to get out of lockdown and try and come to our mountains and our beaches. We're not even allowed to go to those places ourselves, so they certainly can't. And yeah, and I think there's something about the mindset of a certain kind of ruling class, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
English, be careful how to phrase this, the kind of received, entitled, patrician, born to rule kind of class, let's put it that way, to the extent such a thing persists, or the vestigial rump of that thing persists, just doesn't get it at all. It's unthinkable. It's like, yeah, unfathomable. And yet events, the way I think of it, because I'm not interested in particularly in kind of class dynamics and nation dynamics. I mean, they're interesting phenomena, but I don't really have a particular axe to grind, really, in that regard. Certainly less now than I did as a younger person. But yeah, there's just something about the incapacity to understand that there are times where events are in charge, and the human kind of input is fiddling around the edges of it, really. It begins to feel like one of those times. That there's no one that knows what's going on, really, and there's no one whose judgment calls are consistently accurate. And so we have a hierarchy of events rather than a hierarchy of human thinking.
Can I be the cynical voice here? Because this is, jokingly speaking, but I'm dead serious on that. But I suppose I can express some more cynical opinion from the two of us, and if I'm judged or hated, this will be easier to get off with.
Be my human shield. Yeah.
So there's always been something on my mind that I've been heavily judged, and people, saying, well, you're not allowed to say that. And I suppose we're living in this day and age where people are not allowed to say authentic things because this is kind of hateful. But from a very neutral point of view, the English gene, let's say, I'm not a genetics expert by any stretch, but I'm expressing that metaphorically, but the English gene is always been entitled the conqueror of the world.
Yes.
There's absolutely no possibility, in my opinion, that this is not dormant somewhere in there, in the collective, mentality. So this might influence some decisions.
Sure.
Not sure of that, but I'm sure there's the trace of history in the collective unconscious, if you will.
Yeah, I follow. Yeah.
So connecting that to the non-consistent decisions from time to time.
Yeah. It exposes some interesting fault lines in the body politic, as it were. That I don't for one second think are caused by the virus. I don't mean that at all. In fact, if anything, the virus increasingly to me feels like a beneficent force, a kind virus, if you like, that has come to deliver an excuse by which we reckon with ourselves in new ways that are long overdue. And there's a kind of around the world there's that economic argument, isn't there, between persist in keeping people safe by having them locked down and their health is underwritten by the isolation to some degree, or get them back to work. But then there's the whole kind of thing around who's being exposed, who's more likely to die, and so forth. And of course, there is a reality at that level, but there's also the sense that the economic structures were falling apart already. They just hadn't realized it yet. This has been a long time in the making, and certainly isn't. You can't credit that or scapegoat that onto the virus. The virus has become a kind of pause in which it's possible to defer some of that, or There's a British comedian said on a program this week, how did he put it? Something to do with late period, voracious, destructive capitalism has had to postpone eating the rest of the world by up to 10 years because of this virus, slowing everything down. There's that critique in there as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's going on.
Real point.
I think at the level of normal, regular human people, it seems to manifest as inherent conservatism in a small c, non-political way, I mean, in Britain, and confusion. So people are like, well, hang on, you're telling them this thing and us that thing, and who's right and who's wrong, and what does it mean, and can I do this? Can I drive there? We live in a kind of border not far from the border here on the Welsh side. But yeah, there are lots of people I know who live in Wales, work in England, or live in England, work in Wales, and it's really confusing. It's really unclear. Is their journey essential or non-essential? Should they go back to work? Should they not? Very confusing. But yeah, the inherent conservatism is lots of people are just not doing anything. They're just staying put. At least in around here, that's kind of my reference point for it. And talking to people in other places for my work purposes, clients in other cities and all around the country and abroad. I think the other thing you could say, which is very typical of Britain, is that most of the legislative process and the thinking, political class, understanding of any of this is it's just phenomenally skewed and biased towards London. It's London centric more than, I think that's a more useful analysis than any kind of class level thinking actually at this point. So the rules are designed to apply within very large urban centres, and increasingly make less and less sense the further out from those centres you go. Yeah, and that confuses people too. It's a strange one, that, isn't it? That was it within a couple of years that we passed, as a human collective, we passed that point where more than half of all human beings live in cities. That happened in, like, I don't know, 2016, 2017, something like that, I think, demographically speaking. And so one could say this is the first pandemic experience in human understanding that coincides with the majority of people being urbanized rather than dispersed in sort of a mix of urban and then countryside settings. So I don't know what that's, it's like a gravitational object field going on there. But cities, yeah, increasingly don't feel like the optimum place to be in a condition of more and more restrictive lockdown. I certainly past a certain scale of city. Yeah, I wouldn't be swapping places with someone in the middle of London at this point. Not, all sorts of great things about London, but yeah, I need to be able to see trees and the sky and have an option for a walk that is not just concrete.
People seem to retreat to more nature-oriented lifestyle anyways these days. This might have some formal side to it, because the city, as you were saying, is not the safest place to be right now. And on top of that, the city holds the law right now of the lockdown.
Yeah.
But when you go to a meadow, for example, there's no human law attached to it. There's the natural law, which I think that, on one end, the virus might not spread that easily. Huge meadows, spacious area. There's a low probability and possibility to get to you. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that this is from what I've seen in client working with myself. When you have some part of nature around you, or you are in nature, submerged in nature, there's a very archaic, very old, and very human part of us, / animalistic probably, but human at the same time, that starts to obey the natural law. not in terms of you have to eat the weak and survive in the jungle and so on, but more of you become part of everything
Yes.
right now because this is the way to go for it.
Yeah.
And at least my experience right now is seeing people do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's, for example, people saying that there's the mountain next to the city because
Yeah.
we have this next to Sofia, or people from other countries saying, "Oh, I have my grandma. She's living 500 kilometers from my place, and it's an old house in the countryside. I'm going there." Something not that valued before the lockdown crisis.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Hmm.
I suppose the summer that we are on the verge of entering, right now, it's already May, which is quite astonishing if you're already May 2020.
Yeah.
And summer officially probably next month, beginning officially with June.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing huge spa resorts full of people. More like camping or hiking.
Okay. That's really interesting too. Here, there's nothing on that level. That's another element of the debate. People are keen to know, can we and when can we and what can we do in terms of a holiday this year? And government ministers saying there will be no holidays, or there will be no holidays abroad, or there'll be they're then forever trying to retweak their message, to say holiday at home, holiday, go camping, staycation, all these kind of rebrandings of, don't go far, basically. But I notice in myself that that's the yearning, is to get further out, further to the edge, further to the margin, to the coast. That's been the one that's accompanied me all the way through, which is, it's not new. It's a desire that often arises, but because it can't be met, it's strong enough. So I found myself having to reassure myself the other day at some level that, yes, I will put my feet in the sea again soon, one day. Yeah.
I've heard something that really got my attention and got all sorts of questions from people I know, from friends, especially living in London, that right now there's this favorites list in the UK that each and every person has the right. This is how I got it, of course. Each and every person has the right to pick someone as their favorite and meet them outside on a 6 feet distance. And each day you can change the person to label favorite. And one of the first questions that got to me is not so much of a question than a concern. Many people will be upset because they won't be picked up as favorites.
Yeah.
Well, you can wait for the next day, but emotional response to neglect or ostracism or something like that is not delaying itself. It needs to be expressed right now. And I was just imagining the hundreds and thousands of people that will be upset on a deeper level, but if you express that on the outside, might be considered as not grown up enough.
Oh yeah, very good point.
And it's a very it's a contrast, it's a dissonance on some other level. And just sharing that because I'm not able to make full sense of that, but it's something that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, and it does have a kind of recapping of playground dynamics. Who am I going to choose to be on my team to play football, or who's going to be coming to my birthday party? It's got that very kind of regressive aspect to it. It seems to me. Yeah.
There's something about it. Yeah.
Do you have, or have you had in Bulgaria, the I mean, there's a very particular British expression of it, but I'm aware it's been happening in lots of places. This sort of projection onto, started with medics and nurses, and it's spread to key workers. That's the phrase of the day, isn't it?
Mm.
Of different kind of ways of symbolizing. Well, it started as symbolizing appreciation and gratitude and kind of honoring of the valor of these people in the face of the battle of the thing. You can see immediately where this language is going. And then almost within a week here, it had turned into this whole superhero narrative that really won't go away. So we've talked about this lots of times before in terms of, you know, client material, in terms of pop culture and, you know, Marvel superhero films being the dominant force in cinema, or the comic book kind of versions of things, but it's taken a form within virus time as well, of projection onto healthcare workers is the classic one. So around here, and I'm sure it's true all over Britain. In fact, I know it is from looking at pictures online, and I've probably got versions all over the place, but because we have NHS, that's the kind of the branding, as it were, for the National Health Service, and it's just this logo of the three letters. People have changed the S into the Superman S, so it's Superman S, and these pictures and posters and chalked things
that's
everywhere, and it's an interesting phenomenon. And I'm aware of some caution in approaching it for all kinds of reasons. But there are increasingly a range of responses to it, it seems to me, from the strange compulsion to participate that is almost then expected of people. So it's become the new Remembrance Day almost in Britain, like where people in public life are all expected on pain of ostracism to wear a poppy. Now you're expected to stand outside your house and clap on a Thursday evening at 8 p.m. to symbolize your appreciation and your participation as a citizen and all of this. And none of it's ever said, but it's it's clearly understood. And yet it's already taken a divisive political tone. So you can just look on any day on Twitter or, you know, wherever you choose to get your daily bile, and there will be a host of posts from people saying, if you voted this way at the last election, you have no right to stand there and clap. You know, you voted to, whatever. So all of that, those fault lines being exposed. But on a more primary level, two things. This hit me the other day. I had to drive to a chemist to pick up a prescription, and I drove past one of these big painted NHS superhero S murals, and as I went past it, the thought hit me, oh, what if I was on my way to hospital to work? If I was, you know, an ambulance driver, or if I was a paramedic, or if I was a intensive care nurse or doctor, how would I feel driving past this sign? And my first feeling was, I might feel a bit of pride, but almost instantly, probably based on the mood I was in the moment, was a sense of collapse and judgment, a sense of, everyone else, all my peers and colleagues, this must be for them. But I don't feel like a superhero. I feel like an ordinary schlob, or I feel a bit below par today, actually. I feel like I'm only capable of giving about 70% today, or maybe less. You know, maybe a couple of hours into my shift, I'll be less than half. Oh God, you know, I'm going to let the superheroes down. I'm a liability. I'm the weak guy on the team. I'm the link that's going to break. This kind of little weird insight into the intention in painting the mural. Well, what is it? It's to give uplift and to symbolize, you know, we're all in it together and all these things. But it has these massive unintended ripples, potentially, of shame or of guilt or of offset. And then that got me thinking about the function of heroes in human culture generally, never mind superheroes, which is a very kind of recent squeezing the very last juice out of the lemon that's been absolutely for everything you can get from it. And I think following the kind of orphan wisdom tradition a little bit here, the presence of heroes in cultural narratives is almost a guarantee. It's the master symptom, you could say, of the fact that whatever the culture is we're speaking about, it has already been traumatized. Hence the need for superheroes or heroes of any kind to arise. So by the time you get those culture heroes, the culture's already broken unto itself. It's rendered, pulled asunder, and the hero is an attempt at like a suture or something to pull that back together, but it can never succeed in that regard. It never really integrates. It's a splitting rather than an integration. I just wondered how any of that sits at your end.
I'm immediately reminded of this might be too popular and might be obscure when sharing them, but in previous years, in previous periods of my life, I've been reminded of very brave heroes when hearing the word hero. People or creatures or people in disguise that are so so strong on one end, but not in terms of physical strength. But they have some special ability that gives them strength in terms of many facets of the superpowers. But in recent years, when saying hero or when recalling the idea of a hero, I got reminded of Christ. And I suppose this is a more general archetypal image that can be reached out there. And from previous discussions, that are not on the lockdown conversations right now, we've touched upon my newly found old love for Wilfrid Bion, who is entitled a psychoanalyst, but I highly doubt that, because he's a more of a mystic kind of the person that's using his mind to approach in a mystical way some kind of truth and love and light and stuff like that. Very extravagant. He's been excluded for many ideas from the psychoanalytic circles, and he's been very hated, labeled senile and old and crazy and stuff. But there's a quote I love that's, I believe it's connecting directly to the murals and the S in the NHS and how these medics are, how is this burden on their shoulders? Because I do believe this is a burden on some level.
Indeed.
What's it taking out of them? What's it demanding for them to continue on living and doing their jobs? If I was a medic passing by the mural, I would quit immediately my job, probably at one. It would be too unbearable to have this. And it's not the medic that's happening, it's the mural that's happening, which is even heavier as a dynamic. I will try to see where I have the quote from Beyond, because it's a very, very good place to see.
Good flavor to introduce.
Okay. This is a quote from his so-called Brazilian supervisions. So he transferred to. This is a funny thing because he moved out of the UK to Brazil because there was too much attention towards him. So it landed very heavily on him, and it's probably no coincidence I'm being reminded of him while conversing the medical doctors, which are labeled Superman, Superwoman, and then exceptional. So he went there, and his work from then on is very humble. It's very I'm inclined to say realistic, with a capital R. So he has so much to deliver to the people that it becomes painful to read or to just behold.
Yes.
So his quote is from his time, his last years in Brazil. So he's very old and forgotten at this point, probably for many people, but there are people that listen to him and then read his books. And he's saying something about Christ and the hero, and then how he, and probably from his own experience being a medical doctor on the field during Second World War.
Yes.
And he's saying, I quote, the Christians got him in the end, Christ. From his messianic prison house, he never escaped till every trace of meaning had been squeezed out of him. This is resonating very heavily within me with the thing that you were saying about the medical doctors.
Yes.
If this sounds to someone as who is watching the episode, if this is interpreted as some kind of disgrace, or I'm saying something that cannot be said in this day and age, I'm sorry, but at the same time, I'm not sorry, because this is a part of reality with which we have to learn to cope. And I think there's something about that.
Read it again, Martin. Read it again.
Yeah. So the Christians got him in the end. From his messianic prison house, he never escaped till every trace of meaning had been squeezed out of him.
Yeah.
I think there's a variation of that in some of his other books, where the ending is changed a little bit. He's saying until every single drop of blood has been squeezed out.
Yeah. We've drained him dry.
Yeah.
Well, and that first line, the Christians got him in the end, that's it's very telling. Yeah. Well, and it surely retells a story. One could read enormous amounts into that. It's a hugely pregnant quote, isn't it? But the sense by which something of significance at a kind of collective, one might argue, cosmic level, really, gets co-opted back into a structure. So the breakthrough of Christ, or the breakthrough of the Buddha, or any of the kind of spiritual heroes of a certain age, are always kind of devastatingly vertical and absolute and complete in and of themselves, and everything changes, like a rupture, an event horizon, like going back to our conversation last time. And yet the rearrangement of Maya, as someone from an Indian religion might say, or the capacity of structure and form to re-establish itself and adapt in rapid order, or maybe to kind of crudely render it in psychological language, it's like Rocky in the Rocky movies, the capacity of ego and ego world, the ego psychology, to get back up and reassert itself is enormous. So yeah, the breakthrough of Christ, well, we're still talking about it 2,000 years later, or in the case of the Buddha, 2,500 years later, and on and on. And we still exist, which arguably is the underwriting reality of those things. But the form, the structure, that which is the impediment to the realization, is more present than ever as well. Its capacity to reorganize itself and reassert itself is astounding. As I've heard it described, the second most powerful force in creation. It's the revelation being the most potent force, but even that doesn't cancel out the other. And I mean, lots of directions we could go from here. This is a real crossroads point. But the sense of, well, try this on. Here's a quote from something I was listening to recently, which I'm not going to remember verbatim, but I'll try and do a best kind of memory of it, do it a bit of justice, from a particular teaching that I was listening to by Igor Kufaya. And he says in this particular teaching, there is no such thing as the subjectivity of ego. That ego subjectivity is a thing that does not exist. In fact, he goes further and says the very idea, the concept of there being a subjectivity that arises from ego is blasphemy. That's his phrase for it. This is a blasphemy. And the only subjectivity that exists is at the level of the self, recognizing itself as itself, to itself, endlessly. Yeah. We've broken the internet at this point. That was interesting. Yeah, we froze.
It says on my end, your internet connection is unstable.
We seem to be back again now. Yeah, that was hilarious. The blasphemy of calling out the ego's fake subjectivity broke the internet there. I love it. Either that or the self decided to realize itself through the medium of our freezing.
Yeah.
I'm not screaming that on you, but how does that hit your ears?
Well, definitely on the same level that we've discussed about splitting in the world, in probably physical splitting between groups of people, national, but even the internal one that's more of a psychological and more of a spiritual phenomenon.
Yeah.
I do hold in my head that this is a survival thing, probably evolution, probably so, but there's certainly a spiritual dimension to that, being split. And from, the blasphemy, blasphemy being there is a curious event in itself, just existing in the world.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking right now is that, and I do apologize again. I'm with all the apologizing today. I don't know why, but I do apologize again for saying that. But probably Mahatma Gandhi is an asshole too in some part of his life. But people decide not to acknowledge that. Deities and Christ and God, there's probably an asshole aspect to them too. There's the dark aspects, the shadow aspects. People sometimes ignore,
yeah,
or choose to ignore.
Yeah.
And right now, medical doctors, I'm not saying anything, but they're human beings and they help and they sacrifice. But we've seen that along the news. If a medical doctor had it too much, or if he or she is fed up with the situation, if they yell or scream or swear, this immediately puts them down in hell by the people around them. And this becomes a blasphemy. How can you not preach the medical religion these days? This is saving our species. So off with your head or anything that's...
Oh, absolutely. That's a very important point. And it's a very big restriction, a limitation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it maps onto perhaps we've touched on it before, but the military experience, the war metaphor behind a lot of this as well. That, whilst the battle is on, it pays off to keep calling your troops heroes, and perhaps to do that in a more or less sentimentalized way after the event too. But in reality, they're just disposable and discarded at that point too. They're not required anymore, or the battle's been won or lost. Yeah, the story's moved on. And I guess I suspect, and who knows? It remains to be seen. But I do suspect there will be a lot of people, certainly in the British context, who will leave the NHS when this particular chapter of intensity is over, for a whole bunch of reasons. But yeah, I think there'll be some that feel, I have done my time, I've served my shift, I can't do that again. It's not in me to do again. And also someone else can take a turn. But the projection of the hero and the heroic does perhaps suggest that a new generation will perceive that and think that's where the action is. That's where you get the medals, and you get to kind of feel useful and serve your community, your country, however one wants to put it. I was just looking up blasphemy as a word as well. That it's sort of a Middle English word from Latin, from Greek, literally cognate with profanity. So it comes to mean to slander, to poison, to slander, to besmirch. But profanity itself's an interesting word because it literally means before the altar. So it's one of those words that's changed its meaning. You say it's profane as opposite to sacred, the sacred and the profane. But profanity itself literally means in front of or before the altar, the symbol of that which is holy, the most sanctum. So it's a kind of non sequitur in its own understanding of itself. Another one of those woundings in language, that it's moved its meaning at some point to the very opposite. And maybe that gets to the root, the thing about in a time before the need for heroes, there also was no way, you couldn't say, if you and I were dwelling in some Garden of Eden kind of pre-fall, prelapsarian scenario, we couldn't say one to the other, I love nature, because it wouldn't mean anything, or I love animals, or all one could acknowledge would be, I love that which I am. That which arises in me loves that which arises in me.
Right now, or just happening as it is.
Yes, this, the as it were, the I amness of being, rather than the I am specific thingness of being, the differentiated state. And the capacity to move in and out of them rather than split them.
But being in the Garden of Eden, that means that the only thing that we might know exists is the Garden of Eden, and that's it. There's no contrast, there's no splitting that can show you there's the other part of that. And I do believe many people live and preach that lifestyle. Think positive. There's nothing bad that will happen. I can construct my own Garden of Eden.
Good luck.
This is no problem.
And there's also the way in which you could say, in the history of awakening, if we could look at it that way, in human beingness, it's never popular. It's not just unpopular to modern, globalized capitalist societies, which it clearly is. It's unpopular under any conditions because it's against the form that is the prevailing condition. It's, at the very least, it's one's community going, don't leave us. You're the best of us. We need you. Stay, help us, don't abandon us. That prevailing pull. But very frequently it's like, oh God, we better burn this one. It's seen too much. Or quick, nail this one up. This one, we can't have this. This doesn't go anywhere good for my particular interest group or my hierarchy.
This reminds me of something that Will, to the people watching, Will Parfit, we both know, we've both been studying with him in the past, and I just got reminded of this very brief, very short window of time of sharing between me and him, and he shared a mythological, archetypal story, like a folklore, something that was so intense at the time of him telling that, sharing that just blazed itself into my consciousness, and it's there. There's no specific narrative to it. It's just like uniform idea that alchemists in the past, they were looking for many other things besides the philosopher's stone. This remained as a pop cultural idea that's out there. It's the highest possible order of achievement for the alchemist.
Mm.
But there was something more that the alchemist was looking for, and this is how to reach the surface of the sun and
Mm.
live there.
Mm.
So here comes the myth of Icarus. Anyway,
Yes.
we can join that, to the
Yeah.
party. But one of the problems with reaching the sun, going out there up on its surface, is that you cast no shadow. It's bright, it's warm, and I've probably shared that in one of the previous episodes, but it's connecting more to
Yeah.
the subject that we're talking about. And just several days ago, I was joining a Facebook group about some Jungian philosophy discussions, and people just post something in the group, and other people comment. And I've shared the idea that if you go up there and you don't cast any shadow, that might be a very pleasant experience, because no shadow, no haunting, no persecutory anxiety, no inclines to, no, nothing of that. But that's not reality. That's not the human nature.
Yeah.
And there was a person saying, sorry to disagree, but there's a phenomenon called enantiodromia.
Oh, yes.
In its extreme, light produces darkness, and its extreme darkness produces light.
Yeah.
And this is a huge part of Jung's ideas about, the dramatic personality shifts. When you're at your darkest, you actually discover your light.
Yes.
And I'm really curious, please do tell me how this resonates with you, but in that context, what's actually happening with the medical doctors? Praised for what they do, and they sacrifice a lot. But where will the light in the darkness appear, and where will the darkness in the light manifest itself?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Well, and it conjures things like the Taoist or Taoist symbol, doesn't it? That kind of yin yang symbol, and in a way that is an enantiodromia, and it is a sense in which it's all about the boundary, and we only see it in 2 dimensions, but presumably there are many more dimensions to that make it move and be dynamic and playful. To have Almas, A.H. Almas calls it brilliancy, like a kind of self-illumination, which is like a sun, really. But also that it's luminous in its nature. That's part of its kind of wisdom side. So yeah, that makes me think of how in the correct, there's a phrase to conjure with, understanding of Taoism, which I do not claim to possess, I hasten to add. The Tao that can be spoken is not the real deal, as we know. But at some observational level, there are no straight lines in any of that. They are curves, and they are arcs, and they are kind of river-like bends or organic branch growings. They're not straight lines and right angles. And so to even make a Superman S out of the thing is to partake of a symbol making, that has a continuum within it, that has a dark side as much as it, also the person making that mural at best is someone with a certain pop imagination, or a certain maybe graphic understanding of things, but they are, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest they're not the world's greatest magician, and therefore they are playing with things that are beyond their capacity to control and understand. That this is the way structure reasserts itself. So
do you remember sorry to be interrupt, this image just popped in my mind. Recently we've been having a lot of movie marathon family time at home, and watching all of the Harry Potter movies in a row, that's quite an experience. I highly recommend it to anyone. But in the first movie, there was this scene where Harry goes on to pick up his first wand. He goes to this legendary person that constructs ones out of phoenix feathers and then dragon something hair or something like that, that's put in the wand and produces magic.
Mm-hmm.
And he is trying to consult Harry on how powerful he is, how wise or how trained he is to hold the wand.
Yes.
And he's saying, hold this one. And he's just getting his wisdom out of his mind, his experience, and just seeing Harry, seeing the cupboard with wands and saying, hold this one. Now wave it. And he waves it and destroys a part of his shop. He says, oh, no, wait, this is not it. Yeah, gives him a second. A funny thing, probably curious one, is that at the end he gives him a very, very, very powerful one. And it just clicks with the boy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's with him for me. So I suppose this is the one other thing that we've discussed. This is the difference between power and force.
Yeah, precisely.
How it manifests with each and every person, and probably
yeah. And I mean, this is maybe a topic for another time, because it's a bigger thing, and it would take some thinking about in advance to make any sense about it, really. But the magical term, at least in the kind of Hermetic tradition, the perennial philosophy, or the kind of Western mystery tradition, one could say, is often talked about as the egregore, this kind of idea form or thought form that can, in some sense, be summoned or worked with or entertained, or so one could say any individual human being is an individual human being who might be inhabited by or be a vessel for this egregore, as it were, that when that person, moves on or dies or whatever happens to them happens, the egregore is unaffected. It's just somewhere else. It's like very much like a virus, actually, in a certain way, but it's at the level of, well, what would you say? I guess it's a kind of astral phenomenon at some level, but subject. So these are not particularly clean magical operations, and they're often attached to particular sigil forms and things. So I guess these go back to runes and various other kind of keys, early alphabets, ways of describing reality, fixing meaning in order to exert certain kinds of control patterns, and then centuries of distortion, power dynamics, all of that stuff, which weirdly crackling round some strange arcs here, that brings me back to something that we were thinking about, speaking about too, which is music, and in particular music as an expression of certain forms. So music, more than any other art form, I think it's pretty well established, not very controversial point, is direct. It isn't mediated by the mind. It directly goes to the body, to the emotional center, and it is capable of transforming consciousness in very short order. One's mood can change utterly, for better, for worse, for being openly manipulated, or for being very subtly induced in certain ways. And I guess I've been listening to a lot of music lately, and it's not escaped my notice that a lot of the originators and the kind of first few waves of musical kind of pioneers in a pop and rock tradition are passing away, are dying. I mean, I guess just since we last spoke, Little Richard departed the earth, arguably one of the first summoners of whatever the egregores behind rock and roll happened to be. And as many pointed out in various obituaries I read, there is no greater lyric than what bapaloo baba what bam boom. That is it. That says everything that could be said, whilst being utterly meaningless and nonsensical. That's the exact point of its plasticity. So there's that. And even just yesterday, I was really saddened to hear that Phil May, who was one of the founders and the vocalist in the Pretty Things, very favourite band of mine, he died, having fallen off his mountain bike and smashed his leg, had a hip replacement, urgent operation. Some complications arose from that. And then, yeah, a couple of days later, sadly, he died at 75. So, yeah, God rest his soul. But, and actually, I just throw that out there for people who may have somehow missed the Pretty Things, who were contemporaries of, yeah, you know, that kind of British invasion of the US, although they never really got off the boat and never really invaded. But they are like a sort of harder version of the Rolling Stones. They arguably give rise to the concept album. There kind of wouldn't be such a thing had they not released theirs first, SF Sorrow, which is a work of unutterable genius. Thoroughly recommend it. If you haven't heard that, anyone out there, you know, you're in for it.
I can write it down.
1967, yeah, contemporary to Sergeant Pepper's, all of that, made in the studio next door. But it rocks like a beast. It's got some extremely intense guitar work upon it. It's very heavy drumming in almost like what becomes the kind of Led Zeppelin drumming kind of style, or certain periods of The Who. Yeah, it's great. It's got some wonderful melodies, beautiful harmonies, very dynamic, very high point of the psychedelic 60s, I would say. Something of a lost masterpiece. And I think probably, should civilization in its current form persist, will come to be known as such as well. You know, we'll look at things like that as we look at certain Renaissance paintings and think, wow, yeah, that's where it happened pretty much for the first time, more or less. Yeah, it's got that about it. Really great. Most of their work's great, but that's particularly great. So yeah, throw that out there.
But I just, you know, while you were talking, I was thinking about something that we discussed, and we've touched upon that before, that both of us, the rock and roll fans, and we have that in our culture, and that's been there. But there's a social exclusion of that massively. I don't need to offend anyone, but there's a contemporary idea that, I quote, if you don't listen to jazz, you're an idiot. Which, fine, there's some types of jazz that are wonderful, and there's a lot of you know, passion with that music.
Yeah.
But there's something about, for me personally, and probably for you, something about rock and roll that's telling a story, that's scanning reality. It's a very realistic music because its enchantments and its messages are about the real.
Yes.
The real with a capital R again. And sometimes it's very hard to listen to lyrics in rock and roll because they are telling you, listen now, there's been an aspect of our lives that you've been neglecting so far. Here it is.
Yeah.
No wonder why children, kids before their adolescence, don't in particular listen to rock and roll. You know, this begins with adolescence because it resonates to the suffering that, shit, I'm not a kid anymore. But I'm not an adult. And I suppose it corresponds very beautifully, very romantic, in a very romantic way with our wounding.
Yeah.
And I find that very beautiful. Some people don't find it beautiful. Of course, this is probably where the social exclusion comes.
Yeah.
But there's something very shamanic about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even bands like Motorhead, that's being very hated but very respected at the same time. You know, there's something about that. Three people sing and play about the suffering they've witnessed in the world.
Yeah.
So this is
with absolute commitment. You know, you can't You can't just show up and perform that music. You can't curate that music. You have to be it.
Yeah.
And it's no accident, it seems to me. Motorhead, as far as I can tell, the first band of a certain stature, a certain, recognizable, globally known name, where all the original members of the band are dead, all of them. So Motorhead are they get their first band to reassemble the original lineup in the other place, the other world. Yeah, it would be Motorhead, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I've been thinking about some other thing that has been happening for 10, 15 years probably. Musical genres and the respective cultural bits connected to them are switching places. So the reckless, the drugged, the drunk, and the cheating, and all sorts of things connected to rock and roll right now are connected to completely different musical genres and lifestyles. Even some of the, if you play the radio and listen to people like, I'm not sure about all of them right now, but Kanye West or people like that, they sometimes say we are the new rock stars. And this might be, fun to hear, and there's probably a media coverage of that, and people say, yeah, way to go, but there's something about it that's truthful to the development of how people approach music and the musical culture.
Yeah. Well, and there was a particular period of time in which that music could happen and did happen, and we get to watch it fade from the world. It seems to me that was always part of that music. It, as you said, it's romantic with a capital R. It's yearning for a time and a place that probably never existed in that way, and yet it made itself exist in that image. And now, as those people age and die, that music leaves the world as a living thing and becomes an artifact, or some of it will be curated. Some of it, I mean, we have recordings. That's the way to it. I was listening to Robert Plant. He has a podcast called Digging Deep, which I recommend. Very good, where he just picks a song that he's involved in from his entire career, and each episode uses a song as a way of talking about different times in his life, different experiences, how this came to be, where I was in the world when this happened, how this linked with that. It's a kind of storytelling, really, really interesting. And you can feel it happening over the course of one lifetime there, from having been, arguably one of the preeminent, quote unquote rock gods, clearly was, and clearly also possessed, probably quite consciously, knowing Jimmy Page's dabblings in the background. But something for a while with a band like Led Zeppelin was elevated to another plane, not just in the imagination of the listener, not just in the imagination or the mind of those within the bubble of the band itself, but as much as one could say such a thing, objectively. It's as if consciousness itself was deciding to use this platform to express something that presumably was necessary. And if you had to kind of distill that even further, it comes down to certain kind of riffs. It comes down to the sound of a particular, it's all there in the kind of fractal or hologram or whatever that is, battle cry, call to arms, a chord, or a kind of just a riff, a kind of strum of two or three things. It's like, the entire thing is called, the entire nervous system responds. Like, where do I point myself? Right, go. And that is of inestimable spiritual value, it seems to me. I really do. I stand by that. It's utterly vertical in its nature, and yeah, making the point about music, that's what it's for, in its myriad forms, subtle and gross, but it needs to be appropriate to its time, and that really was. So yeah, I wonder what's your, this is a very unfair question to spring on you, but what's your favorite Led Zeppelin song?
One of the songs that I admired and envied for many years is When the Levee Breaks.
Okay.
Because being involved almost 20 years, playing drums and doing that professionally, thank God that's a chance that I'm aware not every drummer has, but I've been involved in that.
Yes.
And just listening to the way this thing was recorded, played, and constructed, I was having both those, on one end was the way to go, John, that's you there smashing like there's no tomorrow. But on the other end of the spectrum, I was like, how could you? This could have been me if I've been born earlier, or I've been a musical genius like yourself. And so this is one of the songs. Black Dog is another song that's resonating with me, and it's a different story with that. It's very correct song as it is composed, but it's a very confusing song. There's a feeling of the song will have that pulse, just into it.
We seem to have stopped again. Aha, yeah. We're back.
We're back. Yeah, not sure where I've reached with the thing, but so about Led Zeppelin's Black Dog. There's a pulse that people expect intuitively to be 1, 2, 3, 4, but then the song surprises you. It builds up, and on the combination of things, it goes with 1, 2, 3, 4, and just gets your full attention, and then it betrays your expectation immediately. And human beings don't like stuff like that, because being betrayed around your expectations for something that will happen or not, of course, this angers people often. But it's a completely different thing here. So just riffing through my mind, that these are two songs that I like, but there's something about Led Zeppelin that's always got my full attention. I've never been able to think about that on my full capacity. It's very confusing, but if I have to put it very very shortly, or express it with one sentence, it would be that Led Zeppelin are not Deep Purple.
Yeah. Oh, indeed. Very different.
Because they don't have Smoke on the Water. And Smoke on the Water is probably the most recognizable, the most archaic, the most stable and solid musical structure in rock and roll. Probably besides the Immigrant song on Led Zeppelin's end, but it's more complex. So just comparing two incomparable things, but there's something about that Led Zeppelin is so complex.
Yes,
it's so deep in terms of musical expression and just spiritual manifestation.
Yes,
that they never reached the simplicity behind Smoke on the Water by Purple, or the Who is complex either way, but
yes,
Uriah Heep, something like that.
Yeah.
And I suppose this is a kind of responsibility, probably an unconscious thing. if you carry on the musical genius with you, if you're willing to be the shamanic practitioner on the stage and in the studio, you have to be ready to never reach the full potential of your music.
Yeah.
And that's a very bitter pill to swallow, if you ask me. That's just knowing that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And that the betrayal at one level becomes delivering the goods at the other level.
Yeah.
That the ego experience itself as betrayed on those levels, but yeah, the self gets fulfilled or gets to hear what it needed to reconfirm itself. I know we're kind of running out of time, but just, yeah, my favorite current, because it varies, it changes. I'm unfaithful in that regard, or inconstant, but yeah, I was thinking about this last night, and what I came to was that my favorite Zeppelin song of recent times, probably, let's say for this year so far anyway, would be Achilles' Last Stand.
Yeah.
Which it probably links us back to Heroes again as well, as it clearly even in the name, about the heroic, yeah, and the, well, yeah, just monstrous cosmic riff making that goes on in there, and obscene kind of drumming that astonishing, and incredibly fluid and melodic bass playing that seems to stitch the entire thing together. And then, yeah, howling shamanic yeah, visceral kind of vocal lines and lyrical lines as well. The whole thing about Atlas holding heaven and earth apart, that yeah. So yeah, I'd sign off on that note.
What's probably a very synchronistic, occurrence here is that the song, I believe, is on the album called Presence.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Just that bit probably adds a nuance to that.
Yeah. Nice. Maybe a good place for us to pause.
Yeah. We can probably hold this part one and go with the part two for music.
Good idea. Very good idea.
Spiritual bits of music and how it's been throughout the ages,
absolutely,
lifetimes.
Yeah. It's a rich vein of form for us to explore there.
Yeah.
Let me switch off our recording. See you all later.